I always thought turning 61 would be unremarkable. Just another candle on the cake. Another quiet celebration in the warmth of family love. How wrong I was. That evening would become the moment I realized that sometimes the deepest wounds come wrapped in birthday paper, delivered by the hands we trust the most. The maitre d' had just guided us to our table at La Maison, my favorite French restaurant in downtown Boston. The crystal chandeliers cast a soft glow over the white tablecloths, and the familiar scent of fresh-baked bread and herbs should have been comforting. Instead, I found myself gripping the edge of my chair, trying to process what had just happened in the lobby. "Mom, aren't you excited?" Emily's voice carried that artificial brightness I'd started noticing more frequently lately. She sat across from me, her perfectly manicured hands clasped around a glossy envelope. The gift she'd presented moments ago. Next to her, Charles adjusted his tie, wearing that practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. The envelope contained a voucher for a guided tour of Sunset Haven, a luxury retirement community 20 miles outside the city. But it wasn't just a tour invitation. No. My daughter and son-in-law had made that crystal clear in the lobby, with rehearsed speeches about new chapters and practical solutions. "This is the perfect timing," Charles was saying now, his words floating somewhere above my head as I stared at my untouched water glass. "Emily and I need more space, especially with our future plans. And your house is just sitting there too. Big for one person? Future plans. They weren't even expecting a baby. I'd had lunch with Emily just last week, and she'd complained about her demanding work schedule making family planning impossible. Yet here they were, using a non-existent grandchild as emotional leverage to claim my home. My home. The Victorian sobrato James and I had lovingly restored over 30 years. Every creaking floorboard, every rose in the garden, every paint color had been chosen with care. The bay window where I still sat every morning with my coffee, watching the neighborhood wake up. The study where James had spent countless hours, working on his novels before cancer took him 2 years ago. Our home. I felt the familiar tightness in my chest, the one that had become my constant companion since James's passing. But tonight, it was different, sharper, more urgent. As Emily launched into detailed descriptions of Sunset Haven's amenities, the bingo nights, the water aerobics classes, the vibrant community of seniors, I heard myself responding with appropriate murmurs, nodding, smiling. But inside, something was shifting. A quiet rage, cold and precise, was taking shape beneath my practiced politeness. I watched my daughter's animated gestures, noted Charles's calculating glances, and made my face a mask of mild interest. They had no idea that their perfectly orchestrated plan had just awakened something in me, something that James would have recognized immediately. As the waiter approached with menus, I caught my reflection in the window. I looked exactly as they expected, a mild-mannered widow of 61, ready to be quietly shuffled off to a retirement community. How convenient for them. How wrong they were. That night, after the excruciating birthday dinner, I couldn't sleep. The house seemed to whisper with memories, each corner holding pieces of the life James and I had built. I found myself in his study at 3 a.m, running my fingers along the spines of his books, remembering how he used to say that a home isn't just walls and windows. It's a repository of stories. Our story had begun right here in Boston, 35 years ago. I was a junior curator at the Museum of Fine Arts, cataloging a new collection of American Impressionist paintings. James was a visiting professor of literature at Harvard, working on his first novel. We met at a coffee shop on Newbury Street during a snowstorm, both of us seeking refuge from the biting February wind. He spilled his coffee on my exhibition notes, and instead of apologizing, he started analyzing the coffee stains as if they were abstract expressionist art. I remember the day we found this house. It was a mess. Peeling wallpaper, creaky floors, a garden so overgrown it looked like a jungle. But James saw potential in broken things. "Look at those bay windows, Mary," he'd said, his eyes sparkling. "Imagine the stories we could write here." We spent every weekend for 2 years restoring it, learning about Victorian architecture, arguing over paint colors, and falling more in love with each other and this home with every passing day. Emily grew up here, her childhood marked by the changing seasons in our garden. She used to help me plant tulip bulbs in autumn, her small hands covered in dirt, her laughter echoing through the yard. James would watch us from his study window, occasionally calling out ridiculous gardening, advice he'd made up on the spot, making us both giggle. But somewhere along the way, after she met Charles in law school, something changed. The warm, creative girl who once painted murals on her bedroom walls transformed into someone increasingly distant, increasingly calculated. Charles's influence was subtle at first. Suggestions about practical career choices, comments about maximizing asset value, little digs about how the house was somewhat outdated. James noticed it before I did. "Watch them carefully, love," he'd warned me during his final months, when the cancer had made him startlingly perceptive. Charles has been eyeing our home since the day he first stepped into it. And our Emily. She's forgotten what this place really means. I walked to the bay window, my morning coffee spot, and watched the streetlights cast long shadows across our front garden. The roses James and I had planted were in full bloom, their scent drifting up through the slightly open window. 25 varieties, each chosen for its meaning in the Victorian language of flowers. The white roses near the fence meant silence. The pink ones by the path symbolized gratitude, and the deep red climbers framing the front door, they meant courage. My fingers traced the familiar pattern of the window frame, feeling the slight irregularity where James had accidentally nicked the wood during restoration. We'd left it unrepaired, calling it our perfect imperfection. That's when I noticed my hands were shaking, not from age or weakness, but from a deep, simmering anger I hadn't allowed myself to feel at the restaurant. The house creaked softly, as if responding to my touch. In the quiet darkness, I could almost hear James's voice. "Remember who you are, love. You're not just my widow or Emily's mother. You're Mary Sullivan, the woman who spent 2 decades helping artists' voices be heard, who taught art history to underprivileged kids, who never backed down from a fight worth fighting." Dawn was breaking now, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I hadn't slept at all, but I felt more awake than I had in months. It was time to start looking through James's old papers. Something told me I would find what I needed there. The morning after my birthday, I started going through James's filing cabinet with trembling hands. Each drawer contained meticulously organized folders. My husband had always been particular about his paperwork. As I pulled out the medical files from his final months, a folded document slipped out and fell to the floor. The date caught my eye immediately. It was from 2 years ago, during James's second-to-last hospital stay. My coffee grew cold beside me as I read the document, then read it again, my heart pounding harder with each line. It was a power of attorney form, giving Emily broad administrative rights in case of incapacity. I remembered that day. James had been heavily medicated, barely lucid. Emily had brought several papers for him to sign, explaining them as routine hospital documents, while I was down in the cafeteria getting us dinner. My phone buzzed with a notification. Emily had just posted another photo on Instagram. My living room, but digitally staged with modern furniture overlays. The caption read, "Planning the perfect nursery space. Quadran new. Chapter. Family. Home." The comment section was filled with congratulations. Not about a pregnancy, I noticed, but about getting a bigger house. My stomach churned as I realized she'd been laying this groundwork for weeks. I opened my laptop and logged into my email. There it was, a message from Charles sent at 6 a.m. with an attached PDF labeled Transition Timeline. The document was color-coded and detailed, breaking down the next 3 months into weekly phases. Week 1 to 2, Mom's preliminary tour of Sunset Haven. Week 3 to 4, begin sorting and packing non-essential items. Week 8, complete transfer of utilities. Week 12, final move-in date. At the bottom was a link to a Pinterest board titled New Family Home, Sullivan Legacy. My throat tightened as I clicked through it. They had already planned every room, down to the paint swatches. My art studio was labeled as Future Playroom. James's study, with its floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that had taken us months to build, was marked for complete renovation, home office. The phone rang, making me jump. It was Ann Patterson, my lawyer and friend of 20 years. "Mary," she said, her voice careful, "I just received some concerning paperwork from Emily's law firm. They're inquiring about the property deed and asking about procedures for transferring utility accounts. Want to tell me what's going on?" I filled her in, my voice surprisingly steady despite the anger and fear coursing through me. When I mentioned the power of attorney document, Anne's sharp intake of breath told me everything I needed to know. "That document is still valid, Mary," she said quietly. "If they choose to use it, they could make things very difficult for you, especially if they decide to question your capacity to manage your own affairs." "Question my capacity?" I repeated, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. "I'm 61, not 91. I teach art classes twice a week. I manage all my own finances. I know," Anne cut in gently. "But they're lawyers, Mary. They know how to build narratives. A widow, living alone in a big house, possibly struggling with grief, resistant to reasonable family assistance." She paused. "Have you noticed any other unusual behavior?" I told her about the Instagram posts, the Pinterest board, the detailed timeline. As I spoke, I heard keys jingling at my front door. The spare set I'd given Emily years ago, for emergencies. Through the study window, I could see her and Charles getting out of their car, carrying what looked like paint samples and measuring tape. "They're here now," I whispered into the phone. "Anne, what do I do?" "Don't confront them," she said firmly. "Not yet. Let them think they're in control. Meanwhile, I want you to start documenting everything. Every conversation, every email, every social media post. And Mary, don't sign anything. Not even a birthday card. Are we clear?" I watched my daughter use her key to enter my home without knocking. Heard her calling out, "Mom," in that honey-sweet voice that had become so foreign to me. Crystal clear. I replied to Anne and quietly closed the study door. That afternoon, I gave the performance of my life. I smiled and nodded as Emily and Charles measured my walls, discussing crown molding options as if I weren't even there. I watched them place paint swatches against my carefully chosen wallpaper, their voices animated with plans for modernizing each room. All the while, my phone sat in my pocket, quietly recording every word. The realtor from Sunset Haven called. Emily mentioned casually as she held up a fabric swatch against my curtains. She can show us 3 different floor plans tomorrow. I've already cleared your schedule. I knew you wouldn't mind missing your Tuesday art class just this once. Just this once. The words echoed in my head as I remembered all the just this once moments that had led here. Just this once, they'd rearranged my kitchen cabinets while I was at the doctor's. Just this once, they'd organized James's study, boxing up his manuscripts for safekeeping. Just this once, they'd cancelled my art exhibition volunteer shift because I needed rest. "Of course, dear," I heard myself say, my voice warm and pliant. "Would you like some tea while you work?" In the kitchen, my hands shook as I filled the kettle. Through the doorway, I could hear Charles on his phone, speaking in low tones about expedited paperwork and cognitive assessments. I carefully measured loose tea into the infuser, Earl Grey, James's favorite, and thought about the morning he taught me to play poker. "The secret, love," he'd said, shuffling cards at our kitchen table, "isn't in having the best hand. It's in making them think they know your hand better than you do." He'd been teaching me because his brother was a card shark, always trying to take advantage at family games. Let them think they're smarter than you. Let them think they've got you figured out. That's when they make mistakes. The kettle whistled, and I arranged everything on my grandmother's silver tea tray, the one Emily had already marked as for consignment on her Pinterest board. As I carried it back to the living room, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked exactly as they expected, slightly confused, accommodating, harmless. "Perfect. Mom," Emily said as I set down the tea. "We should really start thinking about which furniture pieces you want to take to Sunset Haven. The apartments there are cozy." She exchanged a meaningful look with Charles. "We could start with the easier rooms first. Maybe the guest room?" The guest room, where I kept my art supplies, where, hidden behind a false panel James had installed years ago, I now had a small fireproof safe containing copies of all our important documents. They had no idea it existed. "Whatever you think is best, sweetheart," I murmured, watching them share another satisfied glance. "I trust your judgment completely." That evening, after they left with their measurements and plans, I sat in James's study and made 3 phone calls. The first was to Rachel Martinez, my friend and real estate agent, who listened in silence before saying, "I can have it done in 2 weeks, Mary. No signs, no listings, just a quiet cash deal. Trust me." The second call was to Linda Thompson, the sharp-eyed manager of my condo building, who had witnessed more than a few tense moments between Emily and me in the lobby. "Security cameras?" she repeated after I explained my situation. "Why, yes, we did just upgrade our system. Records everything. Stores it for 90 days. Such a shame if someone were to, say, document unusual access patterns or removal of items without proper authorization." The final call was to Jack Werner, the young tech whiz who taught coding at the community center where I volunteered. Untraceable email accounts, private social media monitoring. Of course I can help, Mrs. S. Nobody should have to fight this kind of battle alone. As I hung up, I noticed my hands weren't shaking anymore. In their place was a steady, cold clarity. Emily and Charles thought they were carefully dismantling my life. They didn't realize they were giving me all the pieces I needed to save it. I opened my laptop and created a new document titled Garden Club Minutes, a folder name so boring they'd never look twice at it. Inside, I began documenting everything: times, dates, conversations, photographs, every measured wall, every canceled appointment, every helpful suggestion that slowly chipped away at my independence. The house creaked and settled around me as night fell. In the darkness of the study, I could almost hear James laughing. He would have appreciated the irony. How our daughter's carefully constructed plan was about to teach her the most important lesson of all. Never underestimate someone just because they're being quiet. The next week passed in a carefully choreographed dance of deception. I attended the Sunset Haven tour with Emily, making all the right appreciative noises about the community garden and the weekly bridge tournaments. "Oh, look at that lovely sitting area," I'd say, watching Emily's satisfied smile grow with each enthusiastic comment. "And the art room, how wonderful." What she didn't know was that Linda, my building manager, had given me access to the security footage showing Emily and Charles making multiple unauthorized visits to my condo while I was at the tour. The cameras caught them, measuring rooms, opening closets, and photographing my belongings. Linda had documented everything, time-stamped, and backed up to a secure cloud drive Jack had set up for me. "They spent an unusually long time in your home office," Linda told me over coffee in her security room, showing me the footage, "particularly around your filing cabinets." I watched the screen as my daughter and son-in-law methodically went through my papers, taking photos of documents with their phones. "Perfect," I murmured, thinking of the carefully crafted financial statements I'd left in plain sight, the ones that made my assets appear far more accessible than they actually were. Meanwhile, Rachel was working miracle after miracle behind the scenes. "I have 3 serious buyers," she texted me securely through an app Jack had installed. "All cash offers, all willing to close quickly and quietly. One of them is particularly motivated. She's an art collector who loves Victorian architecture." I maintained my daily routine with deliberate precision. Every morning I'd walk to the local cafe, order my usual cappuccino, and work on what appeared to be simple crossword puzzles. In reality, I was documenting every interaction, every subtle manipulation attempt, in a code James had taught me years ago. The barista probably thought I was just another retiree enjoying her morning routine. Emily's social media campaign intensified. Her Instagram stories now featured regular updates about Mum's exciting transition. She posted photos of Sunset Haven's amenities, wrote touching captions about giving Mom the retirement she deserves, and even started a hashtag, Sullivan Family Legacy. Each post was automatically archived by Jack's monitoring system, building our documentation of their premeditated plan. The most challenging part was maintaining my facade during their increasingly frequent visits. They'd arrive unannounced, armed with storage boxes and donation bags, speaking about my belongings in the past tense. "This old desk would never fit in your new space, Mom," Emily said one afternoon, running her hand along James's writing desk, the one where he'd written all 5 of his novels. "But don't worry, we'll give it a good home in Charles's study." "You're probably right, dear," I replied mildly, while mentally noting how the afternoon sun highlighted their reflections in the antique mirror, the one that was, coincidentally, capturing video of the entire interaction through a tiny camera Jack had helped me install. Charles became bolder, leaving printouts of assisted living brochures on my coffee table, sending emails about cognitive health workshops at Sunset Haven. Each document, each email, each recorded conversation became another piece of evidence in what Anne was calling our protection portfolio. One evening, as they were leaving after another planning session, Emily hugged me. "You're handling this so well, Mom," she said, her voice warm with approval. "I was worried you might be difficult about the changes, but you're being so reasonable." I hugged her back, breathing in her expensive perfume, remembering when she used to smell of crayons and bubble gum. I just want everyone to be happy," I said softly, the words tasting like ashes in my mouth. After they drove away, I sat in James's study, surrounded by the books they's planned to donate to the library. I opened my laptop to check Rachel's latest update about the house sale. The art collector's offer was well above asking price, with a guarantee of complete discretion and a 7-day closing period. In the quiet of the evening, I could hear the distant sound of traffic on Beacon Street, the familiar creaking of hardwood floors, the gentle ticking of James's old clock. Soon these sounds would belong to someone else. But as I reviewed the day's recordings and added them to our growing documentation, I felt a fierce satisfaction. They thought they were orchestrating my farewell to this house. Instead, they were orchestrating their own. I knew the breaking point was coming when Emily texted me at dawn. "Exciting news! The moving company is coming today. Charles managed to get them to squeeze us in last minute. They'll be there around 9 a.m. Don't worry about a thing. We'll handle everything." My hands didn't shake as I read the message. I'd been expecting something like this, a forced acceleration of their timeline. The previous evening, I'd overheard Charles on the phone in my garden, arguing with someone about property valuations and market timing. "We need to move faster," he'd hissed, unaware that Linda's security cameras caught every word. "The market's shifting, and that house is our only shot at the downtown property portfolio." I took my time getting dressed, choosing my outfit carefully. A soft gray cardigan that made me look appropriately grandmotherly, paired with slacks that had hidden pockets for my phone and digital recorder. As I pinned my silver hair back, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I looked exactly like their idea of a helpless widow. Perfect. At 8:45 a.m., I called Linda. "They're coming," I said simply. "Security cameras are all running," she replied. "I've got the lobby feed split to your secure drive, and I've alerted the day guard about unauthorized moving attempts. Do you want me to call Anne?" "Not yet. Let's see how bold they're planning to be." I was in the kitchen, calmly making tea, when I heard multiple vehicles pull up outside. Through the window, I watched Charles directing a moving truck into position, while Emily hurried up my front steps, using her key without bothering to ring the bell. "Mom!" Her voice was bright with forced cheer as she burst into the kitchen. "Isn't this exciting? We've got everything arranged. The moving team will pack everything, and by tonight, you'll be settled into your beautiful new apartment at Sunset Haven." I turned slowly, holding my teacup with both hands. "But dear, I haven't packed anything, and I haven't even signed the lease at Sunset Haven." Emily's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Don't worry about that. Charles and I have taken care of all the paperwork. Remember that power of attorney from when Dad was sick? We're just using that to make things easier for you. You don't have to stress about any of the details." The movers were already entering my house, Charles leading them with authority, pointing out furniture. "Start with the master bedroom," I heard him say. "Then the study." "Emily," I said quietly, "I haven't agreed to this." She reached for my arm, her grip just a little too tight to be comforting. "Mom, we've talked about this for weeks. You've been so positive about the whole thing. Don't start being difficult now. It's not good for your stress levels." Through the kitchen door, I could see men starting to wrap my furniture in moving blankets. One of them was removing paintings from my walls. Another was stacking boxes by the stairs. "I'm going to need you to stop," I said, raising my voice slightly. "This is my home, and I haven't authorized this move." "Mom," Emily's voice took on that particular tone, the one she'd been using more and more lately, speaking to me like I was a confused child. "We've been planning this for months. You've been to Sunset Haven 3 times. You said you loved it." "Mrs. Sullivan?" A deep voice interrupted from the doorway. It was Marcus, Linda's head of security, looking impressively official in his uniform. "We've received reports of an unauthorized moving attempt. I need to see documentation of the homeowner's consent." Emily's face flushed. "This is a family matter. I have power of attorney, which was granted during your father's illness and has no bearing on current circumstances," came another voice, Anne's crisp tones carrying from the front hall where she stood with her briefcase, looking every inch the formidable lawyer she was. "I suggest you stop this right now, Emily, before we have to involve the police." The silence that followed was deafening. Charles appeared in the doorway, his face darkening as he took in the scene. "Now, look here," he began. "No," I said, setting down my teacup with a quiet clink. "You look here. I have documented every step of this attempted appropriation of my property, every unauthorized entry, every manipulative conversation, every social media post announcing plans for my home without my consent." "Linda, would you please show them?" Linda stepped forward with her tablet, playing security footage of their numerous unauthorized visits, their conversations about property values, their attempts to access my financial documents. "Mom," Emily's voice cracked slightly, "we were just trying to help." "Get out of my house," I said softly. "Take your moving truck and your power plays and your condescending concern and get out. Anne has already filed an emergency injunction against your power of attorney. If you try anything like this again, the next step will be criminal charges." I watched their faces as the realization hit. Not just that they'd failed, but that I'd seen through them all along. That every accommodating smile, every agreeable nod, had been part of my own careful plan. As they walked out, Emily turned back one last time. "Mom." "Goodbye, Emily," I said, and quietly closed the door. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of purposeful activity. As soon as Emily and Charles's car disappeared around the corner, Rachel arrived with Catherine Morrison, the art collector who wanted to buy my house. While Linda's security team patrolled the perimeter, ensuring no unexpected returns from my daughter, Catherine walked through each room with reverent attention. "The original crown molding, these pocket doors, that magnificent bay window," she murmured, touching the woodwork gently. "Mrs. Sullivan, what you and your husband did to preserve this home's character is remarkable." I watched her studying the study's built-in bookshelves, the ones James had measured 4 times before installing. "Will you keep them?" I asked quietly. Catherine turned to me with fierce certainty in her eyes. "Every single one. This house deserves to be cherished, not gutted and flipped." She paused, then added softly, "I promise you, Mrs. Sullivan, no developer will ever get their hands on this property." Rachel had the paperwork ready within hours. The sale price was well above market value, with a guarantee of historical preservation written into the deed restrictions. Catherine's financial team arranged for immediate wire transfer of funds, while Anne worked her legal magic to expedite the closing. "Emily's going to fight this," Anne warned as we sat in her office, signing document after document. "She'll claim you weren't competent to make this decision." I smiled, sliding another signed paper across her desk. "That's why I had my physician perform a complete cognitive assessment last week, and why I've been seeing my therapist twice a month since James died, with detailed records of my mental clarity and decision-making capacity, and why Linda has footage of Emily and Charles discussing their real estate investment plans in my garden." I met Anne's eyes. "I learned from James that the best defense is built before anyone knows you need one." Late that night, After all the papers were signed and the funds were transferred, I sat alone in James's study for the last time. The house felt different now, as if it too knew change was coming. I opened his desk drawer and pulled out the false bottom he'd shown me years ago, retrieving a sealed envelope I'd never opened. My name was written on it, in his familiar handwriting. Inside was a key and a letter dated 2 months before his death. My dearest Mary, if you're reading this, it means you finally found yourself in need of our escape plan. I always hoped you wouldn't have to use it, but I've watched our daughter changing over the years. The way she looks at our home, the way Charles has influenced her thinking. I knew this day might come. The key is to the cabin in Vermont. The one I told you was just a writing retreat. It's more than that. It's fully furnished, well-maintained, and completely paid for. The deed is in a trust that only you can access. Emily doesn't know it exists. Remember what I taught you about chess, love? Sometimes you have to sacrifice a piece to win the game. Let them think they've pushed you into a corner. Let them think they know your next move. Then show them that you've been playing a different game entirely. The cabin is at the end of Maple Creek Road, in Stowe. There's a garden out back that's perfect for your herbs, and the sunroom faces east. Just the way you like it for your morning coffee. The local art gallery is always looking for teachers, and the community is small but welcoming. Most importantly, it's yours. Truly yours. No strings, no manipulations, no well-meaning children trying to plan your life for you. Go find your peace, my love. Show them that quiet doesn't mean weak. Always, James. I pressed the letter to my chest, feeling tears fall. For the first time since this all began. Outside, a moving truck was pulling up. Not Emily's this time, but one arranged by Rachel, staffed by a carefully vetted team. They would pack everything according to my detailed instructions, sending most items to storage, but delivering specific boxes to an address in Vermont. My phone buzzed with messages from Emily. Accusations, guilt trips, threats of legal action. I deleted them without reading. Instead, I opened the secure email account Jack had set up for me and began composing a message to the family lawyer. I would like to establish a foundation. Call it the Freedom Serenity Fund. Its mission will be to provide legal and practical support to elderly individuals facing residential displacement or financial manipulation by family members. Initial funding will come from the proceeds of my home sale. The study walls were now bare, the bookshelves empty. But as I sat at James's desk one last time, writing out the framework for a legacy he would have loved, I felt anything but empty. Emily and Charles had tried to write the ending of my story. Instead, they had only succeeded in helping me begin a new chapter, one entirely of my own choosing. The Vermont autumn painted the world in shades of gold and crimson as I drove up the winding road to my new home. James's directions led me to a cedar-sided cabin nestled among sugar maples, their leaves creating a natural privacy screen. As I turned off the engine, I sat for a moment, taking in the silence. Not the tense silence of my last weeks in Boston, but a peaceful quiet, broken only by birdsong and rustling leaves. The key from James's letter fit perfectly in the lock. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood and sunshine, with large windows letting in dappled light through the canopy of leaves. Everything was exactly as his letter had described. The east-facing sunroom, the herb garden visible through the kitchen window, the built-in bookshelves that echoed the ones from our Boston home. But what caught my breath was the painting hanging above the stone fireplace, a small watercolor of our Victorian house that I'd painted on our 10th anniversary. "Oh, James," I whispered, touching the frame. "You really did think of everything." My phone buzzed. A secure message from Anne. Emily's lawyers had finally received our comprehensive response to their threats of legal action. 40 pages of documented evidence, security footage, recorded conversations, social media posts, email trails, medical evaluations, witness statements, and financial records showing Charles's attempts to leverage my property for his real estate ventures. "They've gone quiet," Anne wrote. "Very quiet. Their lawyer just requested a meeting, not to negotiate, but to discuss terms of disengagement. In other words, they're backing down." I smiled, thinking of the additional documents Anne held in reserve. The ones showing how Emily and Charles had already taken out speculative loans against their expected acquisitions of my property. Let them worry about explaining that to their banking partners. The moving company had followed my instructions perfectly. Essential furniture, art supplies, and personal items were arranged exactly as I'd specified. The rest was safely in storage, except for selected pieces that had been donated to a women's shelter in Boston, something that would definitely appear in their local newsletter, establishing a clear paper trail of my cognitive competence and charitable planning. I spent that first afternoon planting the herbs I'd brought from my old garden, transplants from the varieties James and I had grown together. Rosemary for remembrance, sage for wisdom, thyme for courage. As I worked, a neighbor from down the road stopped by, introducing herself as Sarah, a local artist who taught at the community center. "We've been wondering who bought James Sullivan's cabin," she said warmly. "He used to come up here to write, you know. Always talked about his wife. Said she was the smartest woman he'd ever met." I stood, brushing dirt from my knees. "Did he ever mention what she did for a living?" Sarah's eyes lit up. "You're her, the art curator who helped expose that fraudulent American Impressionist collection back in the 90s. James was so proud of that story. How you spotted the inconsistencies that all the other experts had missed." That evening, I sat in the sunroom with my laptop, finalizing the details of the Freedom Serenity Fund with my legal team. The Foundation's first board meeting was scheduled for next week, a virtual gathering of carefully chosen experts in elder law, social work, and financial protection. Linda had agreed to serve as our security consultant, while Jack was developing a secure communication platform for elderly individuals seeking help. An email arrived from Catherine, the art collector who'd bought my house. She'd attached photo of the restoration work already beginning on the garden. "The roses are being carefully preserved," she wrote. "Every variety exactly as you and James planted them. They'll continue telling their story in the language of flowers." I opened my private journal, a new one, bound in soft leather, and began to write, "Dear James, today I planted our herbs in new soil. Like them, I'm transplanting our memories into fresh ground, letting them root and grow in unexpected ways. You taught me that sometimes the strongest move is the quietest one. Emily and Charles never understood that about you. How your gentle manner masked a core of steel. They made the same mistake with me." A notification popped up on my screen. Emily had finally posted on Instagram for the first time since the confrontation. No more pictures of my house, no more hashtags about family legacy. Instead, there was a terse announcement about changing market conditions, forcing them to reassess their property investments. I closed the laptop and walked onto the cabin's back deck. The setting sun painted the mountains in shades of purple and gold, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Here, in this place, James had prepared with such loving foresight. I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Absolute freedom. My phone buzzed one last time. A message from Rachel. "The Freedom Serenity Fund's establishment has been officially announced. 3 news outlets have already requested interviews about elder advocacy and financial autonomy. How would you like to proceed?" I looked out at the darkening mountains, thinking of all the other seniors out there facing similar battles. "Schedule the interviews," I wrote back, "but make them virtual. I have some gardening to do." Talmdon, the first snowfall of Vermont winter, dusted the mountains white as I prepared for my third virtual interview of the week. News of the Freedom Serenity Fund had spread faster than any of us had anticipated. What started as local coverage had exploded into national interest after a prominent morning show picked up the story. "Mrs. Sullivan, you're live in 30 seconds. Jack's voice came through my earpiece. He'd set up a professional lighting system in my sunroom, transforming it into a makeshift studio. The morning light filtered through the snow-laden branches outside, creating a perfect backdrop. "Today we're speaking with Mary Sullivan, founder of the Freedom Serenity Fund," the interviewer began. "Mrs. Sullivan, your foundation has received over 300 applications for assistance in just its first month. Did you expect this level of response?" I looked directly into the camera, thinking of all the letters we'd received. "The numbers don't surprise me," I replied. "What surprises me is how long these stories have gone untold. Behind every application is a senior citizen facing what I faced: careful manipulation disguised as concern, financial coercion masked as family care. You've made some bold choices in how the foundation operates," the interviewer continued. "Can you tell us about your silent protection protocol?" I smiled, remembering the late nights James and I had spent developing security systems for his manuscripts. "The protocol is based on a simple truth. Those who wish to take advantage of seniors often monitor their communications. So, we've created secure channels, everything from encrypted email systems to a network of volunteer art class instructors who are actually legal and financial advisors. Anyone who needs help can reach out without alerting their potential manipulators." The interview continued, but my mind briefly drifted to the latest update from Anne. Emily and Charles had been forced to liquidate several investment properties after their lending partners discovered the speculative loans. Their real estate empire was crumbling, not through any direct action from me, but through the natural consequences of their own overreach. After the interview, I bundled up and walked into town for my twice-weekly art class at the Stowe Community Center. What had started as a simple watercolor workshop had evolved into something more. Sarah, my neighbor and fellow artist, had helped me design a program that served dual purposes: legitimate art instruction blended with subtle education about financial autonomy and elder rights. "Mrs. S," called out Margaret, one of my regular students, as I entered the classroom. "You were wonderful on TV this morning. My sister in Florida called to tell me she saw you." Margaret had been one of our first success stories, using our foundation's resources to protect herself from a predatory reverse mortgage scheme. The class was halfway through their watercolor exercises when my secure phone buzzed. It was Linda, who had expanded her security consulting business to serve our foundation's clients nationwide. "Mary, remember that case in Arizona? The retired teacher whose children were trying to force her into a facility so they could sell her ranch. She used our documentation strategy. They are back down yesterday. The ranch is now in a protected trust. That evening, as I sat by the fireplace, reviewing new applications, a different kind of message arrived. A private email from Catherine, my house's new owner. She'd attached photos of the recently completed garden restoration. The roses James and I had planted were thriving under winter protection, their dormant canes promising spring blooms. The Victorian Horticultural Society has nominated the garden for preservation status, she wrote. They were particularly impressed by the symbolic meaning of each rose variety. The white ones for silence, the pink for gratitude, The red for courage. They're calling it the language of Resistance Garden. I opened my journal, its pages now filled with 6 months of new beginnings. Dear James, I wrote. Today I helped another woman find her voice through silence. Like you always said, sometimes the quietest actions echo the loudest. Remember how you used to worry that Emily had lost the ability to learn from consequences? Perhaps she's finally learning now, though not in the way she expected. A notification popped up on my laptop. Another interview request, this time from a major documentary series about elder rights. They wanted to feature the Freedom Serenity Fund as part of a larger exploration of hidden financial abuse. Next to my laptop sat a stack of letters from people we'd helped. One in particular caught my eye. A thank you note from a retired librarian in Oregon. You taught me that speaking up doesn't always mean making noise. She'd written, sometimes it means being smart, being strategic, and being stronger than anyone expects you to be. The snow was falling harder now, transforming the mountain landscape into a quiet wonderland. In this peaceful setting, far from the manipulations and machinations I'd left behind, I was building something powerful. Every person we helped, every story we brought to light, every quiet victory we celebrated, they all formed part of a growing movement. I picked up my phone and typed a response to the documentary request. Yes, but with one condition. We need to focus not just on the problems, but on solutions. There are too many of us out there, silently fighting similar battles. It's time to show them they're not alone. As if in response, the fire crackled and sparked, casting warm light across James's old writing desk where I now planned foundation strategies. On the wall above it hung a new painting, one I'd created in my first weeks here, showing a single red rose breaking through snow. Beneath it, in small letters, I'd written the words that had become our foundation's unofficial motto. Strength blooms in silence. The email from Emily arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning, exactly 1 year after the failed moving truck incident. I was in my sunroom, reviewing applications for the Freedom Serenity Fund, when her name appeared in my inbox. The subject line read simply, I understand now. My hands didn't shake as I opened it. The past year had taught me that strength isn't about never trembling. It's about what you do, despite the tremors. Dear Mom, she wrote, I saw your latest interview about the foundation. You talked about the subtle signs of manipulation, the way concern can be weaponized, how love sometimes becomes a tool of control. You were describing me, weren't you? You were describing what I became. Through the window, I watched snow falling on the herb garden. The rosemary had survived its first Vermont winter, growing stronger for having endured the cold. Charles and I are separating. Her email continued. After our investment properties fell through, after the bank started asking questions, he blamed me. Said I should have pushed harder to get your house. That's when I finally saw what you must have seen all along. I've spent months in therapy, trying to understand how I became someone who could plot to displace her own mother. I took a sip of tea from James's old mug, remembering all the mornings he'd sat here writing, looking out at these same mountains. Had he known his quiet preparations would not only protect me, but ultimately help Emily find her way back to herself? The foundation you've created. It's extraordinary, Mom. The stories I'm reading about other families, other children who did what I tried to do. It's like looking in a mirror, and I finally see how ugly the reflection is. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not even asking for it. I just needed you to know that I understand now. My phone buzzed. Another success story from Linda. A grandfather in Seattle had used our protocols to protect himself from a similar situation. His daughter, confronted with documented evidence of her actions, had chosen therapy over litigation. Another family finding healing through truth. I clicked reply on Emily's email, then paused. Through the window, I could see the first spring, buds emerging on the maple trees. Nature's reminder that new beginnings are possible, but they can't be rushed. Dear Emily, I wrote finally. Understanding is a good first step, but healing requires more than words. The Foundation is hosting a workshop next month on rebuilding trust after family financial conflicts. Consider this an invitation to attend, not as my daughter, but as someone who needs to learn. Like the roses in our old garden, some things must go dormant before they can bloom again. I pressed send, then opened my journal. Dear James, I wrote, today our daughter took the first step on a long road. You always said she had my stubbornness and your insight. She just needed to learn how to use them wisely. Perhaps she finally is. Outside, the snow had stopped, and the late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across my new garden. In the distance, a cardinal sang, the first sign of spring. The Foundation's workshop was held at a small conference center in Burlington, its windows overlooking Lake Champlain. I stood at the podium, watching attendees file in, when I saw her, Emily, sitting quietly in the back row, her face thinner than I remembered, her designer clothes replaced by a simple sweater and slacks. Welcome, I began, addressing the room of 40 participants. Today we're discussing something rarely talked about, the journey back from betrayal. Whether you're here as someone who experienced manipulation, or someone who needs to understand their own actions, you've taken an important first step. Throughout my presentation, I never directly looked at Emily, but I was acutely aware of her presence. She took notes continuously, her head bowed, occasionally wiping her eyes. When Linda presented our case studies, including an anonymized version of our own story, I heard Emily's sharp intake of breath as she recognized the details. During the lunch break, she didn't approach me. Instead, she joined a small group session led by our Foundation's family therapist, Dr. Martinez. Through the conference room's glass walls, I could see her speaking, hands gesturing emotionally, other participants nodding in understanding. She's been attending weekly therapy sessions for 3 months. Anne told me quietly, as we reviewed documentation strategies. Her therapist contacted me. She's doing the work, Mary. Real work, not just performative change. I thought of James's letter, still kept in my bedside drawer in Vermont. He'd written about Emily's capacity for both destruction and growth, hoping she'd eventually find her way back to her true self. Sometimes, he'd written, people need to lose everything to remember who they really are. After the workshop, as other participants filed out, Emily lingered. She stood by the window, watching the lake's waters turn golden in the sunset. I walked over, maintaining a careful distance. The Foundation's work is remarkable, she said softly, still looking at the water. How many families have you helped so far? 732, I replied. Each one a story of prevention or recovery. She turned then, her eyes meeting mine for the first time in over a year. I've sold the law firm, she said. Used most of the money to pay back the banks. I'm teaching paralegal studies at a community college now. Smaller life, clearer conscience. I nodded, noting the absence of her wedding ring. And Charles? Dubai, she said with a faint smile. Apparently, there's always a market for people willing to push ethical boundaries in real estate. He's someone else's problem now. The room had emptied except for Linda, who watched us discreetly from her security position. Emily reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. These are copies of every document we ever had about the house, the power of attorney, everything. You probably already have it all, knowing you, but..." She took a deep breath. "I want you to have them as a gesture of transparency. And this..." She placed a sealed envelope on top. "This is my official resignation from any claim to make decisions about your life, legally filed with the family court." I took the folder, feeling its weight, both physical and symbolic. "Thank you," I said quietly. "I'd like to volunteer," she said suddenly. "Not with the foundation directly. I understand that would be inappropriate, but maybe with one of the partner organizations, using my legal background to help prevent what I almost did." Through the window, a flock of geese flew south across the darkening sky. Nature's reminder that change, while possible, follows its own timeline. "Start with the workshop materials," I said finally. "Learn everything we teach. Show me you understand it deeply. Then we'll talk about next steps." She nodded, gathering her bag. At the door, she paused. "The roses in the old garden. Catherine sent me photos. They're blooming again." "Yes," I said. "Sometimes things need to be protected before they can grow." She understood the double meaning. With a final nod, she left, her steps lighter than when she'd arrived. I watched until she disappeared down the hallway, then opened my journal. "Dear James," I wrote. "Today I saw a glimmer of our old Emily. Not enough to forget, but perhaps enough to begin remembering why we loved her. Spring came early to Vermont that year, bringing with it unexpected growth in both my garden and my life. The Freedom Serenity Fund had just opened its 10th regional office, and my quiet cabin had become the unexpected headquarters of a movement that was changing lives across the country. "The Senate committee wants you to testify," Anne announced during our weekly video call. "They're drafting new legislation on elder financial protection, and your foundation's case studies have caught their attention." She paused, then added, "Emily's research was instrumental in preparing the brief. Over the past 3 months, Emily had immersed herself in studying elder advocacy law. She worked remotely with one of our partner organizations in Boston, never overstepping boundaries by trying to contact me directly. Instead, her work spoke for her. Meticulously documented reports, innovative protection strategies, and a growing database of legal precedents that strengthened our cause. She's different," Linda commented after reviewing Emily's latest analysis. "The aggressive lawyer who tried to steamroll you? She's gone. This Emily thinks like a protector, not a predator. I was in my herb garden planting new seedlings when Sarah from next door called over the fence. 'Mary, you've got to see this.' She hurried over with her tablet, showing me a viral social media post, a young law student sharing her story of stopping her uncles from forcing her grandmother into a care facility. 'She used our foundation's protocols,' Sarah explained excitedly. 'Tagged us and everything. It's already got 500,000 views.' Later that afternoon, I received an unexpected email from Catherine, the new owner of my Boston home. She'd attached photos of the garden in full bloom, but what caught my eye was a familiar figure in the background. Emily, attending one of the Victorian Horticultural Society's public tours. 'She comes every week,' Catherine wrote. 'Just walks the grounds, never asks to go inside. Last time, she helped an elderly visitor navigate the garden paths and spent an hour explaining the meaning behind each rose variety. She remembered them, all. That evening, as I prepared for a virtual foundation board meeting, Jack updated me on our latest technology initiative. 'We've launched the Secure Communication app,' he reported. 'Already got 300 downloads. And guess who wrote the user guide? Emily. She worked with our senior focus group to make sure every instruction was clear and empowering. The board meeting was discussing expansion plans when my secure phone buzzed with a message from Margaret, my art student who'd become one of our most effective volunteer coordinators. Just interviewed a potential new volunteer for the creative therapy program, she wrote. Emily Sullivan. She was honest about her background, used her own story as a cautionary tale. The seniors in my group were deeply moved. Should I approve her application? I looked out my window at the mountain sunset, thinking of James's words about second chances and earned trust. Opening my journal, I wrote, Dear James, remember how you used to say that true change shows itself in small actions. Over time, our daughter spent a year proving herself through quiet work, never demanding forgiveness, never seeking shortcuts to redemption. I typed my response to Margaret. Approve her, but maintain standard oversight protocols. Trust is built on consistent actions, not single gestures. Minutes later, my phone buzzed again. A simple message from Emily. Thank you for the chance to help, not hurt. The garden coordinator mentioned they need volunteers for rose maintenance. I still remember everything. Dad taught us about pruning. May I? The sun had set now, painting the mountains in shades of purple and blue. In my garden, the herbs James and I had planted were thriving in their new soil. Some had grown stronger than they'd ever been in Boston, adapting to Vermont's harsher climate with surprising resilience. I thought carefully about my response, remembering all the Sunday mornings James had spent teaching Emily about roses, knowledge she'd later dismissed as impractical, just as she'd dismissed so many of his gentle lessons about life and care and patience. The roses need both strength and tenderness, I wrote back. Show me you remember that, and we'll talk about next steps. In my journal, I added, Dear James, today our daughter asked to tend roses again. You always said gardening was the best. Teacher of second chances. Let's see what grows from here. The day I testified before the Senate Committee on Elder Protection Law, the chamber was packed with faces I'd come to know through our foundation's work. Margaret sat with her sister, both wearing Freedom Serenity Fund pins. Linda was there, with several of our security team members. In the back row, quietly taking notes, sat Emily. Mrs. Sullivan, the committee chair began. Your foundation has documented over 1,000 cases of attempted financial coercion against seniors in the past 18 months. What have you learned about preventing such situations? I took a deep breath, thinking of all the stories we'd collected, all the quiet victories we'd witnessed. Prevention starts with recognition, I replied. Not just recognizing the obvious signs of coercion, but understanding how love can be used as leverage, how concern can become a weapon. We've learned that the strongest protection isn't isolation, it's informed community. After my testimony, several senators requested private meetings to discuss incorporating our foundation's protocols into the proposed legislation. As I gathered my notes, I noticed Emily in quiet conversation with one of the committee members, explaining something from the thick binder of research she'd compiled. Your daughter's analysis of pattern recognition in financial coercion cases is groundbreaking, Anne whispered. She's helped us identify warning signs we never thought to look for. That evening, I had dinner with the Foundation's core team at a small restaurant near Capitol Hill. Emily hadn't asked to join us, maintaining the respectful distance she'd established. But as we discussed next steps, her influence was evident in every strategy we'd developed. Back in my hotel room, I found an envelope had been slipped under my door. Inside was a single photograph, the rose garden at my old Boston home, now in full summer bloom. On the back, Emily had written, "The white roses for silence taught me to listen. The pink ones for gratitude showed me how to appreciate what I almost destroyed. The red ones for courage helped me face who I'd become. Thank you for letting me learn from them again." I opened my laptop to check the Foundation's secure message board. A new success story had just been posted. An elderly artist in Seattle, whose children had tried to force her to sell her studio. She'd used our protocols, documented everything, and maintained her independence. The victory post ended with a familiar line. "Strength blooms in silence." My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "The Horticultural Society awarded the garden historic status today. Emily gave them a beautiful presentation about the language of flowers and their role in women's history. She never mentioned her personal connection. Just let the roses tell their story." Looking out at the Washington Monument illuminated against the night sky, I opened my journal one last time. "Dear James," I wrote, "today I watched our daughter help build protections for others instead of trying to break them down. You always said she had it in her to grow into something beautiful. Maybe, like your roses, she just needed the right kind of pruning to bloom true." 2 years to the day after that fateful birthday dinner, I stood in my Vermont garden, watching the morning mist rise off the mountains. The herbs had grown wild and strong, spreading beyond their original beds, much like the impact of the Freedom Serenity Fund had spread beyond anything I'd imagined. The newly passed Sullivan-Martinez Elder Protection Act had made national headlines, named partly for our Foundation's work. It incorporated many of our protocols into federal law. The quiet revolution we'd started had become a powerful voice for change. My phone buzzed with a message from Linda. "Turn on the news." On my laptop, I found a live stream from Boston. Emily was at a press conference, standing with a group of senior advocates. She didn't look like the polished lawyer who had once tried to orchestrate my displacement. Instead, she carried herself with a new kind of confidence, the kind that comes from doing right, not from wielding power. "As a former perpetrator of elder manipulation," she began, her voice clear and unwavering, "I now dedicate my life to preventing others from making the same mistakes. Today we're launching a nationwide training program for legal professionals, teaching them to recognize and stop financial coercion before it starts." I watched as she outlined the program, a collaboration between her community college and our Foundation's partner organizations. She never mentioned our personal story, never tried to claim redemption. She simply showed it through her actions. Catherine had sent me a morning email with the usual garden update, but this one was different. "The roses have inspired something extraordinary," she wrote. "Local artists are using the garden for their senior art therapy sessions. Yesterday, I watched Emily helping an elderly painter capture the sunset light on the white roses. She told him about silence being a form of strength. He said it was the first time anyone had understood why he wouldn't sign over his gallery." To his grandson, "In my cabin sunroom, now filled with artwork from my students and letters from people we'd helped, I sat down to write one final journal entry. Dear James, remember how you used to say that the best stories don't end, they transform. Our story has become something larger than us. The quiet strength you taught me has helped thousands find their own power." My doorbell rang. Sounds so rare up here that it took me by surprise. Through the window, I saw Emily standing on my porch, holding a potted rose plant. Not a dramatic gesture, not an emotional plea, but a simple offering, a cutting from the original garden, ready to be planted in new soil. I opened the door, feeling the crisp mountain air and the weight of all that had passed between us. Emily didn't rush to speak or try to force the moment. Instead, she waited quietly, letting me choose the next step. Just like the roses she held, she had learned the power of patient growth. "The garden could use some new roots," I said finally, holding the door open wider. "Would you like to help me plant it?" She smiled, not her old calculated smile, but something genuine and gentle. Together we walked to the herb garden, two changed women ready to nurture something new into bloom. In the distance, the mountains stood silent and strong, witnesses to all the quiet victories that had led us here. And somewhere, I knew James was smiling. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Give it a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.